Hey everybody, Larissa here from Beekeeping Made Simple. And I just want to talk about a question I had by one of my students that I think was a really great question. It is, I don't know, the 4th or something of May. And so bees are active, but some people used Apivar in the springtime to bring down their mite levels before the honey's coming in. But maybe your Apivar strips are still in because they're supposed to be in for 6 weeks. So what do you do if you have honey coming in and you're afraid if you don't add supers on, your bees are going to swarm? Or even really anytime you use Apivar, people seem to think that it's like something's going to happen if you put a honey super on, because it says in the directions, don't put on honey supers. Take your honey supers off when you use Apivar. So I just wanted to tell you, for one, if you have Apivar in your hive, you can put a honey super on. The thing is that they say not to because that honey is toxic. You don't want to eat it. You don't want to sell it. You don't want to consume it in any way. You don't want to consume the beeswax. You pretty much are going to just have that as feed for the winter time. What I do is if, say the bees are bringing in honey, but you have Apivar in your hive, you can throw a super on. The thing is that you better mark when you put that super on. I put a P in a big black Sharpie marker. Very obvious, even if propolis gets on the frame. And that way I know that is a frame that's poison. And that is not a frame that you can harvest. So then when Apivar is out, you leave it 2 weeks, and then you can start harvesting honey. So then you have to take those frames off, those poison frames that were in with your Apivar. Put them in your fridge, put them in your freezer. Those can be your feed honey for the winter time. It is just the honey that you can't consume. Same thing if it is, fall and you want to use Apivar for varroa mite management. Yeah, I'm not here to judge you or to tell you whether or not treatments are good or bad for you. I just wanted to tell you that you can have a honey super on the hive. It's just now tainted. It's poison. So don't consume it and don't sell it. Second thing is that sticking honey super on your beehive is not going to prevent your hive from swarming. It could possibly, but it also might not. So if you have, hey Owen, if you have a hive that you think is going to swarm, putting honey super on top isn't going to stop them from swarming. It might, but it might not. So what you do is you take frames out of your first two boxes, which is where your brood is, because that's what you need. Is you need room for your queen to lay eggs. You need room for the bees to be building new comb. What you're going to see is not much room for the queen to lay, and that's because the bees are actually stopping the queen from laying by filling up the brood section with pollen. So you're going to see tons of pollen in your brood boxes. So what you do is you take 2 to 3 frames out, both brood boxes, and you put empty frames in. Preferably, since I don't use foundation, I prefer to use foundationless frames, or at the very least, use frames that don't have drawn out comb. You want those younger bees that need to build wax doing their job. In my opinion, that helps a lot more. But you can experiment with that and see if that is a requirement. And, let me know if you don't think that it is a requirement. But either way, you need room in your brood boxes, and that is really going to prevent swarming. You can add honey supers up above and keep on adding, and that'll help prevent swarming for some of your bees, but that isn't like a foolproof way to prevent swarming. Now, maybe you're fine with swarming, and that's okay too. I'm trying to not, just tell people you have to prevent swarming. But if you don't want your hives to swarm and you want to make sure that they don't, I've heard of people saying that they have swarmy bees in the last, maybe 6 or 7 years that I've been doing this personally on my own, as opposed to doing it for another apiary where they're telling me what to do. I've never had a hive swarm that I kept on top of and made sure there were 2 or so empty frames in at least one of the brood boxes throughout swarm season. So those are the 2 things I wanted to mention. I had a student say that she had Apivar in the hive, but she was afraid the bees were going to swarm. Can she add a box? I mean, your hive isn't going to combust. It's not going to explode. Nothing's going to happen if you add Apivar on the hive. It's not like the oxalic acid where you're filling your box up with that vapor. If you're using the vaporizer, it's not even like the Apiguard or the Formic where you're kind of like, it's not basing it off of scent. You're putting the Apivar where the heavy traffic areas are in the brood, and the bees have to walk by it, and then they distribute it all around the hive. So you could have supers up above these Apivar strips, and it's not really affecting the effectiveness of the strips because it's still doing its thing down in the brood section. Now, when it comes to some of the other rural mite management, then how many boxes you have on your hive can affect how well that stuff is going to work. Just keep in mind that Apivar isn't effective everywhere. Some people have overused it or used it and left it in for too long, and it's not very effective anymore. So there's a potential that it's not always going to work. But if you have questions or if other ways have worked for you to prevent swarming, I will give full credit to this swarm prevention method to Michael Bush. I read it on his blog many, many years ago, and I still use it, and it works like a charm every single time. And you do it, you take 2 to 3 empty frames out of both your brood boxes, and your hive is good for weeks. It's not something you have to keep on top of every single week or even every other week. And then you might be saying, well, what are you supposed to do with these frames you pull out? Well, that's where you start splitting, and that's what allows you to go into winter with more hives than where you started in the summer, and what gives you a better chance of having hives come springtime. Or you give them to somebody, because there are very few beekeepers that don't want bees, or post it to Craigslist or Facebook ads that you have a nuke that you're willing to sell. I would be upfront with people, like, I'm not a breeder. I just have these extra bees. Anybody want them, or anybody willing to just give me the cost of their frames or whatever that might be? There's a lot of ways to get rid of those bees. But that's why it's always good to have that extra equipment sitting around just in case. And in a pinch, if you need to do this to prevent swarming, as long as you have an empty box, you can always just go to the hardware store and get that 3/4 inch plywood, have it cut down, and you can use one slab for your top and one slab for your bottom. And it works just fine in the warmer months. Just paint. I've used them for actually way longer than I really should have. But we're in Hawaii, so we can get away with that stuff. All right, have a great day, and talk to you next week. Bye.